Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So today we're going to be talking about autonomy. So let's start off with a definition. What is autonomy? So autonomy is the ability of a country to make its own decisions free from outside influence. It's self-government or the right to self-government. So as we discussed before, what happened with Britain before this was they were basically running Canada. Okay, they had complete authority over Canada's decisions, over whether they were going to go to war, over their taxation situations. They had control over everything. It was kind of like, your age group right now. You've got your own independence, but still mom and dad are controlling a lot more stuff. So autonomy is basically Canada decided we're old enough now, and I think I've used this analogy in class for those of you who've been in class. We're old enough now, we're going to move out on our own. So during the 1920s and early 30s, many of the countries that formed the British Empire began to express their desire for greater autonomy. It wasn't just Canada, Australia was also in on this, New Zealand, India for a large part, but Canada was at the forefront of the movement. And the resulting shift was it went from the British Empire to a British Commonwealth of Nations, which we are now a part of. Countries were free to make their own decisions, both domestic and foreign. Just going to move that. I'm not sure if you guys have it in the way. So both domestic and foreign, we were able to make our own trade deals at this point. Before then, couldn't make our own trade deals. We had to negotiate through Britain if we wanted to trade stuff with the States. So this is really the first time this is happening. Canada also wanted to avoid getting caught in another conflict, especially the one that we had just gone through in World War One, where another European nation decided to go to war with our parent company, England, and we would be dragged into it. It also happened with the Boer War back in the early 1900s down in South Africa, and we were kind of getting to the point where we were saying, it's good that we went, but at the same point, we want to make our own decisions now. And many Canadians and Americans, they didn't want to get dragged into another war the way that we were in the last time. So they started to get towards things, and they started saying near the end of the 1930s, um, or the end of the 1920s, that we want to make our own decisions if we're going to go to war or not. Near the 1930s, the end of it, Hitler's coming to power, and it's kind of obvious that something was going to happen. But at the same point, we wanted to make our own decision on it. Well, that didn't work. Trying to do so many things at the same time here. Okay. So, towards autonomy, King wanted to define Canada's role. We were invited to the peace trade or the peace negotiations in Versailles. We were able to sit at the big boys' table. We still weren't allowed to vote on anything because we were still seen as, we're there, but we're not quite to the same point that everybody else is. But King really at this point is saying we've been around since 1867. We have done exemplary throughout the war efforts. We're old enough to be standing on our own now. We're a big country. We can handle it. We're the biggest country in the world pretty much at this point for landmass. So the imperial policy, let's see what it say here, extending a powerful nation's authority over other nations through territorial acquisitions or economic political power. That's pretty much what the states had done, or what England had done. And to a point, it was, keeping us away from becoming a part of the states. It was keeping us away from becoming the 51st, second, and third state at this time. But he opposed the imperial policy that would force Canada to support the British Empire in the event of another European conflict, which looked like it was happening with Hitler in Germany. And he really wanted to make sure that we had our own say in the matter. It wasn't just automatic. We're at war. Canada, come on and help us out. This is in large part due to the very immense cost, both in financial and in manpower, that we went through during World War One. Big part of that came at Çekmak in Turkey, or Çenek in Turkey. It was a small Turkish seaport in the Dardanelles. It separates Europe from the rest of Asia. In 1920, there was a treaty a treaty between Turkey, which allowed Britain to occupy the territory. And 1922, the British National Forces moved in on the territory, and trapped the British troops. They said, "Yeah, you know what? We want this area back." So what does Britain do? They basically run to the rest of the colonies and say, "Okay, it looks like we're getting ready for this again." As it says here in the second point, Britain sends a telegram to Canada asking for help. We need soldiers. It was made public to the general public. It went to the newspapers before it actually reached King, which kind of ticked him off. And you know, he basically says, we don't even know where this place is, Chenak. How easy is that to roll off the tongue? So he said, not too many people in Canada know where this is. We're not going to be going to fight this. We're talking England versus Turkey. You should be able to take care of yourselves. He told Britain that Parliament was going to debate this. It wasn't just an automatic, we need help. You're coming to help us. We're going to just talk it over, and we're going to see if we want to help you out or not. It didn't turn into a war, but King very clearly sent a message to Britain. You can't rely on us anymore. We're not definitely going to be jumping at your beck and call. We're our own country now. We'll make our own decisions. Thank you very much. And in 1923, Canada, for the first time, signs a peace treaty with the United States. It was about the halibut fishing, and I saw a lot of you commenting on this in the discussion forums. Um, so it was, for rights about fishing in the North Pacific Ocean. Doesn't really concern Britain. I mean, Britain is so far removed from it; it's literally on the other side of the world. So Canada said, "We're going to do this our own way," and he didn't even let the British ambassador into Washington to sign the treaty in the first place. Not that he really had a whole lot of things to say about it, but he basically put his foot down and said, "We're signing the treaty. It's not an English thing; it's a Canadian thing." Once the Halibut Treaty received parliamentary approval, Canada did ask Britain to ratify it. So they said, "Okay, might have overstepped our bounds a little bit, but just need your rubber stamp on this." Kind of the same thing that we've been doing ever since. October 1923, King represented the Canadian Imperial Conference in London, which lasted for 6 weeks. And at this point, King and the other dominions were, no, I can't see what this says down at the bottom. They were basically saying, we want our own position within, the government. We want to be able to make our own choice. And Canada, is kind of standing up with the other countries at this point, saying, pretty much a union. They're standing up saying, we want to have control over what we're going to do. This was the meeting of nations of the British Empire, and Lord Curzon, he's a British Foreign Secretary. He found King and his views very irritating, to say the least. They wanted assurances that Canada would support Britain if there was anything else, and it wouldn't be resolved until the conference of 1926. But Curzon, at this point, he's basically saying, just to King and to the rest of the countries, shut up, know your role. We'll take care of things. We're the big boys. You guys are basically here to serve us. And he just found it irritating. He was part of that upper establishment, which was really not happy with the way that the world was changing. We've talked about the Russian Revolution and how that kind of scared the heads of the English aristocracy. What was going on in Germany at the time, where the Kaiser, he's kind of being pulled apart and said, why do we need anybody running ourselves? We're independent. We don't need kings anymore. We're not in the medieval ages. So yeah, the League of Nations, they started up with Article 10, and we've talked about the League of Nations. That was the group that came along before the UN. Came out of the Treaty of Versailles, and its members basically decided to sign the agreement that said we're going to all protect each other. So Canada didn't really need England at this point for protection anymore. They could trust on the League of Nations. Uh, King didn't like the fact that the League could involve Canada in an international conflict. However, we're just trying to tell England we're not going to be a part of this anymore. And now the League of Nations is coming in and saying we're going to basically do the same thing. We're going to tell you when you're going to go to war. King wasn't happy with that. Neither were a lot of the other countries. It's one of the reasons why the states actually didn't sign the League of Nations, which their own president tried to get started. So Canada, they said we're going to sign it as long as we have flexibility to say, yes, we're in, no, we're not in. But they decided to go along with it, but the resolution was ultimately defeated in 1923. 1926, the Statute of Westminster. This was another point that a lot of you talked about, saying that this was important to, Canada becoming its own country. A lot of you thought that the Statute of Westminster really should have been the beginning of Canada, the day that we celebrate Canada's birthday. So that started in 1926. It was a conference to make a decision between the relationship that Britain was going to have with the rest of its colonies. It created the Balfour Report, which recognized the autonomy of the Dominions as well as the special ties that they have with the Commonwealth of Nations. So it's basically, let me just see, yes, Canada is now free to make its own foreign policy, and it's no longer needing approval from Britain. We've been going that way ever since. We do have the Governor General. Oh, lunchtime for those of you who are in class. We do have the Governor General who is available to basically do the rubber stamp. That's more of a formality these days than anything. Um, but, it was passed by British Parliament in 1931, and it confirmed the independence of the British Dominions from the Federation, from the British nation. So basically, we're all in this together. We're making many alliances. Canada is going to be a part of the same family with Australia, New Zealand, with India. England is still the parent company, or still the parent of this family. But we're out on our own at this point. Also allows us to really get closer ties with the USA. So in 1927, Canada establishes the first Canadian foreign mission in Washington. It's no longer just the British consulate. It's now Canadian has its own consulate in Washington. And what's the purpose of a consulate? It's basically the representative of the Canadian government in a foreign country. Okay. If you have questions on it, please ask me in class or email me if you're one of the home students. And 1927 is before the Depression happens, but after the Depression really gets going, the closer ties with the USA really comes into power because we're locked by oceans on either side of us, and we're hoping that Canada's exports to the States and Canada's exports from the States, it's really going to help out with the difficulties that we're going to face with the Depression. Roosevelt, the president of the States at this point, was also pushing for closer ties with Canada. It made sense. We're right there. Who better to trade with? Who better to, rely on if there was any conflict, financial, military, anything of that nature. So, make us all unified. 1935, both agreed to a trade treaty that lowered the American tariffs to two-thirds of Canada's exports to the United States. This is directly related to what's happening in the Depression. We'll get into that when we're talking about the Depression a little bit more. Or if this video comes up afterwards, we already talked about this in the Depression era. And if you don't remember it, go back and watch that. So Canada was now the USA's most favorite nation. Okay, we're trading with them on absolutely everything. Lumber is coming from us down to the States, where they're making furniture and shipping it back to us, and we're buying it. We're shipping steel down to them. They're making things out of that, cars, other things, shipping that back to us where we're buying it. But they're saying, instead of charging the same amount of tariffs that we're charging to every other country in the world, we're going to give us each other a break. So 1938, the agreement was expanded to lower tariffs on about 80% of Canada's exports to the States, and that laid the foundation of cooperation between the two countries. Becomes even more important during World War II and after. And that's pretty much it on the road to autonomy. There is a couple of sections that you're going to have to read in addition to this, but that's posted in the comments section of the announcements. So, quick little video, and let's get on with the rest of it.